consumer has become a lot more discerning. The standard of care is improving. The customer is actually asking for quality care.
Indian farmers been a poster child in a way for private equity. You know, you've had all the private equities come in.
With increased privatization over the last 2 decades, I think there is hardly any complaint from the consumer on the quality of the core healthcare that a middle class or an upper middle class person can afford.
It's really interesting for me to look at how this industry has evolved, because the Indian pharma success, I think, is clearly a case study in the world today.
I think the issues around talent are very, very real. And that is what is going to be the biggest roadblock of this future growth.
It's always wonderful to come into, campus which looks more like a US campus. I've been here many times, but every time I cherish coming here again. Thank you. I have really a distinguished panel and a very exciting component what we're going to talk about. For one of the biggest things for any industry is obviously the access to capital. So let me start. I'll start with Vishal, who's been the veteran. He's seen this right from the beginning, where probably even at Walkhard he had difficulty convincing people to give a loan to where we've gone. So I think an amazing momentum, right, in the last 3 years. So Vishal, do you think this is going to continue, get better, and what do we need to make sure that this does get us the 10 billion?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Rana. And firstly, to the ISB team, thank you for the invite. Bigger challenge, which are probably yet to be faced in a big way, is that while we can go and put the real estate and the beds and and the infra, which is not so difficult the moment you have capital, I think the issues around talent are very, very real. And that is what is going to be the biggest roadblock of this future growth. And this talent is both on the clinical and the paraclinical side, right? I think all this, we can say the momentum that is happening around the medical colleges and the push to create more and more medical colleges in the country is great. But it should not just remain empty infra, because where is the leadership around the teaching faculties? And that itself is not there in a big way. So I think what we are facing, frankly, Rana, is a great opportunity, which is almost at an inflection point of massive amount of capital that can be put behind. We are seeing great consolidation happening in the sector. We are seeing early stage companies getting exponential amount of capital, which also is not really very great in some ways. But I think what is more important is, from a sectoral headwind perspective, how will we manage some of these changes so that this inflection point truly becomes almost like the foundation for the next 10 billion to come in? Because the 17 has come in over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's come over a long period of time. The other thing, you were telling me is the nature of capital changing, right? So you're now looking at, sovereign wealth funds, which have a far longer horizon. Because, if you look at healthcare, having a stable beta, it becomes like a utility company over a period of time. So it really matches with what they want to do.
Yeah. No, that's very true. So, you can see how much these sovereigns are now beginning to take interest in India's healthcare, which was not necessarily, the trend of the past. And I certainly find that almost all the big sovereigns around the world, particularly, also from, as you recently know, Mubadala is also
Mubadala
now.
from the Middle East.
GIC is there with us in AHH. Temasek, you can call them as a semi-sovereign fund. So, you can see that whole momentum shift. And that's basically because, from a valuation perspective, where the sector is today, the sovereigns also have the ability to not just pay those valuations, but live through that valuations over a much longer period of time. So you can pay a lot more upfront, but how do you sort of hedge it over a long period of time? And I think the sovereigns have the ability to sort of do that. So I think, which is good from the way that, that effectively also means that once the scale is happening behind a couple of these enterprises, there are the long funds which will come in and take position. And that is actually very good for the sector.
because you can really take it to the next level. And you can look at then, even a global play, because,
Yeah.
you have a much bigger canvas.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just think of India, but I think whatever you do in India, there's an opportunity outside. Visa, I'll come to you next. So one of the areas, while the health services we can keep talking about, but Indian farmers been a poster child in a way for private equity. You've had all the private equities come in. There's been a whole story of entry, exit. And you were telling me maybe you think that, medtech would be the next poster child because, while services grow, medtech hasn't really grown at that same level.
Yes, Dr. Rana, I think if I go back to, in fact, I come from a pharmaceutical background, having spent nearly, at least about close to 10 years in the operating position as well as as an equities analyst covering pharmaceutical stocks. So, and it's really interesting for me to look at how this industry has evolved, because the Indian pharma success, I think, is clearly a case study in the world today. If you look at over the last 3-4 decades, how Indian pharma has evolved, right? Especially because of the process patent strength that India had. What India has done is pivoted to now become the largest generics base in the world today.
2022-2023, the total amount of PE investment in healthcare was around 4.6 billion. And I'm talking about the Indian market. This was about 8 to 10% of overall PE investments. So now the exit value of healthcare was around 16% of total. So exit valuations are double the investment amount. So that answers one question, that there is empirical data that there is value in healthcare. So now my research says that much of this is actually being driven by the platform strategy, which is leading to operational improvements in healthcare providers in terms of EBITDA expansion, right? So I know I'm sitting amongst private equity people. You guys are a bit notorious about where the value is coming from, whether it is multiple expansion or actual operational improvement, right? The game is changing for the good. It is coming from operational improvement. With increased privatization over the last 2 decades, I think there is hardly any complaint from the consumer on the quality of the core healthcare that a middle class or an upper middle class person can afford. Okay? The problem there lies in the peripheral services of the healthcare provider. Things like billing, things like claims processing, things like administration while you are in the hospital. Okay? Now these things, there is definitely scope to automate them to an extent, right? Give them handy, maybe on an app to the patient, and improve them. The concerning part which has come to the fore right now, and this might annoy a few private equity and healthcare providers alike, but I will lay it out there, is the perception that private hospitals are money-making machines. Okay? So now there are notorious cases of renowned hospital chains which keep patients on ventilators just to keep their occupancies high, right? Instead of declaring them dead.
As an investor, I would have probably seen the same number of deals in the last 2 years as I have seen in the last decade. So there clearly is momentum, and I'd say for the right reasons. I'd give you a couple of stats, and which at least were important for me, and Vishal covered this a little earlier on number of beds and number of nurses. Per capita spend in India is about $100, circa. Per capita spend in China is about $1,000. Per capita healthcare spend in the US is $10,000. Right? So, if you just stare at those numbers, this is bound to be a multi-decadal growth. It can take any form. It can be a K, Y, but the only direction is upwards. And I think that is where you don't get to play as investors such multi-decadal trends in general. So which is why this is one of those fascinating trends, and you're seeing a lot of capital come into India. But why now? This has been the trend last 10 years also. I'd say 2 key things have happened, at least from our vantage point. I think the first one is consumer has become a lot more discerning. The standard of care is improving. The customer is actually asking for quality care. And this is, the awareness levels have gone up, especially post-COVID. Once they've seen what is the difference between a organized hospital versus a clinic next door. What is the difference between a branded, call it a medicine or a device versus an unbranded device. And I think that adoption has already started to take off quite materially. And you're seeing this, Vishal, in a lot of your own cases. But the trend is real, the trend is to stay, and these are durable trends. I'm not talking about 1 year, 2 year trends. I'd say the second thing that has happened is regulations and government support. It goes unnoticed, but when Nachiket spoke about 500 million people getting insurance covered, you see this on the private side. A number of, in the last 3 to 4 years, we have a thriving insurance business as well. 10 percentage point improvement in private insurance penetration, non-trivial. And what both of these do is this create this positive effect of people looking for quality care. There is sufficient insurance penetration. We are under-penetrated, and as income levels will increase, they're bound to access multiple types of healthcare, right? They'll go to services, they'll buy right pharma, they'll use the right devices, and they'll do diagnostics.